Tonight on Mark Latham's Outsiders, an update from Tommy Robinson in the UK. And where the terrorism starts, school radicalisation. We'll be talking to the wonderfully brave teacher, Mrs A, from Punchbowl Primary School in Western Sydney. We've also got our political panel looking at all the foreign events. Tom Switzer and James Morrow talking about Trump, James Comey and the stunning UK election result. Stay tuned. Well, trigger warning viewers, you've entered a very unsafe space. This is Mark Latham's Outsiders, Australia's most politically incorrect news and current affairs program. No censorship here, no PC, no identity politics, no social engineering, no mainstream media restrictions on what you can hear and what we can say. This is all the ridgy-dig information straight down the line. And of course, Mark Latham's Outsiders now, it's all in partnership with Rebel Media, that wonderful international organisation campaigning hard, news, opinion, commentary, campaigns. That's what we'll be doing here as the Australian base of Rebel Media International. And of course, to join our cause, to be part of the partnership, please go to the website www.marklathamsoutsiders.com, enter your name, your email address, sign up for the Mark Latham's Outsiders Rebel Media Partnership. We've joined forces. Go to that website, marklathamsoutsiders.com, put your name in, whack in your email address, and you'll get all the good oil, all the information that you need for the campaigning we're doing, not only here in Australia but around the world, because these issues pushing back against PC and cultural Marxism, it's a universal international cause. So that's what we're on about. Thanks for joining us this evening for the show. In Australia, 2 days ago on Monday, we had the Queen's Birthday Honours List. And I want to say something about this because I think it's indicative of where the country has gone off the rails. Now, you'd think these honours, recognising the contribution of prominent Australians, it would be something that unites us. But unfortunately, the honours list, yet again, has divided Australians. And unfortunately, in our country at the current time, we are more divided than ever before. I've never seen Australia so divided because of the impact of leftist identity politics. It's men versus women, straights versus gays. It's various races against each other, black versus white, and even religions, Christians versus Muslims. The left has divided Australia on the grounds of identity, and it's no good for our country. The Australian way was to come together in times of difficulty. Now we're split hopelessly apart. And of course, the National Honours System is adding to that division. In 2014, Adam Goodes was listed as the Australian of the Year. He divided the nation on the basis of race. In 2015, it was Rosie Batty who divided Australia on the basis of gender, with her ridiculous proposition that every Australian man is a potential wife beater. How negative, how untrue, how divisive. And in 2016, David Morrison was the Australian of the Year, dividing the country on the basis of political correctness. The absurdity of saying you couldn't say words like guys in the workplace. What a joke, what a goose. Now, of course, we don't need this division, but unfortunately on Monday in the Queen's Birthday Awards, there was more division, recognising the role of these divisive quasi-political celebrities and business people. The top award, the Companion of the Order of Australia, went to Alan Joyce. What a joke, what a travesty. How does he deserve any award? He should be condemned around the country for being such a divisive figure, dividing the nation, straights versus gays, with his sideline campaign. It's become a pet figure of his, a pet project to be pushing same-sex marriage, and it's divided the nation. You've got wonderful Australians like Margaret Court and Stuart Ballantyne who push back against it, saying they're banning Qantas. Joyce, the head of Qantas, is running around like a quasi-politician. His company a few years ago almost went broke. Wouldn't you think he'd attend to the bottom line instead of dividing the country on this issue? So people like Margaret Court, Stuart Ballantyne have said they're boycotting Qantas, and other Australians feel very much the same way. Qantas used to be a company for all Australians, an airline for the entire country. Now it's just for those who are supportive of Alan Joyce's politics. He uses his chairman's lounge the same way to reward the supporters of gay marriage and punish those who oppose it, normally on the basis of their Christian beliefs. So this is a very divisive figure who doesn't deserve any sort of recognition and award in our country. And he's also a figure deeply into censorship. We know from the infamous pie facing, we've shown it here on Mark Latham's Outsiders many times, we know from the pie facing that Alan Joyce, the staff at Qantas, rang around the newsrooms and said, don't show that, It's embarrassing to our boss. Go for censorship, go for PC, go for information and visual control. And unfortunately, at least one of those commercial newsrooms caved in and they didn't show the pie facing. Well, here at Mark Latham's Outsiders, we love it. We love the sight of Joycey copping it in the gob, as many people think he deserved. I mean, how harmless. A bit of pie in the face. Let's have a look at that wonderful footage of Alan Joyce.
Since I've been here to announce the heck. I don't know what that was about. Excuse me. I might take a break for a second, guys, and just clean up a little bit. Well, I've been CEO of Qantas now for close to 9 years, and it was a new experience. Here to announce the heck. Here to announce the heck.
You've got to love it. We show it here, of course, because at least one of the commercial newsrooms has decided not to, so we make up for their censorship here at Mark Latham's Outsiders. So Alan Joyce, in response to that, so harmless, he's pressed charges against that guy in Perth and even gone to the extent of banning the elderly gentleman, the pensioner, from a lifetime ban at Qantas and also Jetstar and Emirates and Associated Airlines. So such a cruel ban against the guy who was just making a political statement against a quasi-political figure in Alan Joyce. So this award system should be for Australians who engage in voluntary effort. I don't see the point in giving an award to someone like Alan Joyce who's trying to do his job as a businessman. Really, these awards should be for those who go beyond their regular role in society that they're paid for and get out there and perform meritorious voluntary community contributions. What about the people running the Meals on Wheels, doing the great work through the Salvation Army, doing the Smith family contributions to looking after the poor and needy? Why aren't they getting the top gongs instead of the likes of Alan Joyce? The award system should have been for those Australians making the voluntary contributions, not someone making $1 squillion a year from running an airline and parading himself around the country as a quasi-politician. But there's another one who didn't deserve the award, another divisive figure, and that's Cate Blanchett. She makes a lot of money from doing her movies. Good luck to her. I don't see why that deserves any special recognition. And she too gets around on quasi-political issues as a quasi-politician. And earlier this year we saw the calibre of her political views. She was on the Colbert Show in the United States talking about what was important to her. Let's have a look at the clip. This is someone who's got the top gong in Australia, and you'll understand why she didn't deserve it when you look at this footage.
As you move forward in life, what's your moral compass? What do you know, where does kindness and humanity sit in a really brutal world?
Cate Blanchett, what is your moral compass? Where does kindness and humanity sit in a brutal world? Because those are important questions to ask right now.
In my vagina.
Really? Really? That's someone who's been recognised with a top national honour in her vagina? Really? I mean, for those on the progressive side of politics wondering about the light on the hill, the New Jerusalem, how do you create the good society, searching around for decades on end, turns out it's all to be found in Kate's undies. It's in Cate Blanchett's underpants, in her vagina, her moral compass. This is someone totally freaked out and delusional about the importance of gender in the political system. It's just quite ridiculous. I just don't see how they deserve it at all. I really don't. I think of the wonderful voluntary contributions from people unsung who should be recognised with the top honours instead of these squillionaires who are just doing their job and parading around on these fringe issues as quasi-politicians. So we've got to clean out these elite honours committees and get back to some basic Australian principle of rewarding those who genuinely deserve the community recognition. So thanks for watching Mark Latham's Outsiders. I'm broadcasting with the image of the Spencer Hotel in Whyalla, South Australia behind me, one of the great outsider venues made notorious during the carbon tax debate and Craig Emerson's goofy song. No Whyalla wipeout here. We're in front of the Spencer. I hope you're enjoying the show, and we've also got a very important update. Last week we had that wonderful interview with Tommy Robertson doing such tremendous work for rebel media in the United Kingdom and pushing back against radical Islamic terrorism, a voice of common sense, a voice of practicality, a voice of real experience in how to deal with this problem. He's on our show again tonight. We're going to get the update right now from Tommy Robinson.
So this Sunday in the UK, we held a rally under an organisation's banner called UK Against Hate. Let me tell you how crazy the situation is in Britain at the moment. And on our rally, our list of speakers were a black Christian minister from a church, the leader of a gay organisation called Gays Against Sharia, a Pakistani Christian convert from Islam, a half Pakistani girl from Scotland who's an apostate of Islam, listening on and on. Now, the media's response to this demonstration automatically was to call everybody far right. Everyone far right and thugs. Also, the blatant lies by the media. The media said, the BBC News came out and said 700 people were there. When you look into this demonstration yourself, look up UK Against Hate in Manchester, you'll see there was in excess of 5,000 people in this demonstration. The one thing this has done is to people like myself, I'm fully aware of what the mainstream media's agenda is. I'm fully aware of the lies they tell, the smearing, the slandering, the campaign they have against us. What this did is it allowed everyone else who's sitting at home, who's now watching with their own eyes, they're interested in what's happening. They're interested in the demonstration. They've seen the list of speakers. They've seen the memos we've put out. They've seen the live footage of the demonstration. And then they've watched with their own eyes and they've seen complete lies about everything. And the worst fact was, I've organised over 100 demonstrations in my time. I've worked with the police, loads of the police to organise these. From the minute I turned up in Manchester, it was very clear there was an agenda. They were orchestrating and would not allow us to be anywhere other than protesting where Antifa were going to be positioned directly next to us, which makes no sense at all. And when I read afterwards in the police's MO, in all the newspapers, I read them saying that their job was just to make sure everything ran peacefully. That is so frustrating when I know completely that is the opposite to what they tried to do on that day. And that's not me having a pop at the individual police officers, because the individual police officers would have wanted a peaceful day. But when the stage we're at in the UK is where the police are being used as a political tool. They're being manoeuvred and they're being made to make decisions in order to make us fail. They did not want us to have a peaceful demonstration. They did not want us to be, which is why all the labouring, the smearing come out. We've had top police officers who slandered this demonstration as an English Defence League demonstration. I left the EDL 5 years ago. It had nothing to do with the EDL. None of the people there were involved with the EDL. Every single media report you'll find about it on the mainstream media will say EDL demonstration. You have to ask yourself, everyone should be asking themselves, why is that? Why are they lying? It's simple for them to do. Any journalist at demonstration would have known it's not the EDL. They'd have seen plenty of black faces. They'd have seen gay speakers. They'd have seen completely that it's not a far-right demonstration. Yet the narrative put out from the mainstream media to the whole country was that it's a far-right bunch of rowdy thugs. You should be asking yourself why they do that and searching for the truth.
Welcome back to Mark Latham's Outsiders. Don't forget our website. This is the place where you can sign up for our new partnership with Rebel Media. It's www.marklathamsoutsiders.com. Go there, enter your name and email address and be part of all our activities. The news, the opinion, the commentary, the campaigning, the all-important campaigning. And of course it's very important to congratulate Tommy Robinson for his campaigning against radical Islam in the UK. Isn't he doing just such a fantastic job? Now, one of the things we need to recognise in Australia and beyond when we talk about acts of terrorism, a lot of these problems start in the school system. It's school radicalisation that can be the foundation stone for radical Islam striking out with terrorism, shocking acts of violence around the world. And a few weeks ago on Mark Latham's Outsiders, we had an interview, a very important interview and dialogue with Mrs. A, the very brave primary school teacher from Punchbowl, who experienced terrible things in 2014. Primary school students, so 11 or 12-year-old boys, chanting the Quran at her in Arabic. This sort of thing, this sort of signalling in the classroom, intimidation against their teacher, and the very worst aspects of radicalisation in the school system. Well, I'm delighted to say that Mrs. A is continuing her campaign against these bad practices, flushing it out into the open, getting an understanding of the serious nature of the problem. Mrs. A, welcome back to our program, and we're very keen to hear an update as to what you've been doing. You met with Minister Rob Stokes in New South Wales on Thursday. How did that go?
Yes, I did. I met with him on Thursday. I went up to his office. And to be honest, I felt like I was in a room with Huey, Dewey and Louie.
Duck faces?
Duck faces. That's all I was getting. Those were the responses, duck faces.
I suppose at a political level, Minister Stokes might have thought if he meets with you, it takes the pressure off with the media saying, what are you doing about all this? But political imagery and positioning is totally inadequate here. He needs to come up with solutions. So you've been through this terrible circumstance of what happened at Punchbowl Primary. You had the intimidation, quasi-threats of violence, I suppose you'd say, direct threats of violence. And did the Minister offer any apology or acknowledgement that these things had occurred and it was unsatisfactory the way they were swept under the carpet?
No, there was no apology. I did ask for an apology, and I did make reference to newspaper articles that had said that he had quoted that no action would be taken and that these incidents didn't happen. And the response from himself and his two advisors, they were quite shocked, and they said, well, that never came from this office. So what's that telling us? That these media articles are fake news? So,
or the department and the minister don't know what they're doing.
They don't know what they're doing.
You've got definite proof that these things happen.
And I went in with that.
I've never heard of any definitive denial to say they hadn't happened. So we're working on the very clear assumption that you're not only a whistleblower, but you're an important figure in telling the truth.
Yeah, people need to know that these incidents are happening. I'm not the only teacher that these incidents happen to. There are other teachers that they've happened to at Punchbowl and at other schools. Now, I had a USB with the information on there as well as printed material. The printed material was never looked at while I was in the room. I laid it all out and it wasn't looked at. It wasn't even touched. And then I had the USB. I told him what was on the USB, and I said to him, I want you to personally look at this, not your advisors. I want you to sit down and I want you to read this and tell me that this is normal. Is this normal? And it's not normal. No human being can come out after reading those incident reports and say, we don't have a problem, and a religious problem.
So did you get any sense that the minister understands the nature of the problem and is willing to learn from it? I would have thought it's bad enough that your matters were swept under the carpet. There were nearly 200 matters listed on the departmental log system, but no action was taken. You were told by the principal at Punchbowl Primary to harden up, and that's the way these kids are. I mean, this is part of the Be Nice Brigade. Oh, this is the way Islam is, and we've just got to live with it. Well, that's hopelessly inadequate. Isn't it important for the minister and the department to learn about this and to have better responses in the future? Yeah,
because we can't respond to the problem until we know what the problem is. So by looking through these incident reports, as I said to him, it's going to give you a snapshot of what is really going on. And until he does that and takes it seriously, we can't fix the problem. And we can't understand what the problem is with these young students, why they're radicalising and why they're becoming so violent. So it was really important for me to have him look at it, but I got a sense that it wasn't important to him.
So what is the solution here? Obviously it's zero tolerance of any form of radicalisation. Take it seriously and suspend the kids, work with their parents.
Yep.
What would you like to see happen?
A lot of the suspensions, people need to understand the system, and the system sounds quite complex, but it isn't complex. In terms of suspension, most of our suspensions are actually done in school suspensions so as not to disrupt the parents. So the children get to sit down in the office and read, draw, nothing more.
Or they're taken out of class,
they're just
but not
taken
out of the
class,
school.
but they're not taken out of the school.
So they should be taken out of the school because that puts the onus on the parents to make a response. If they're still at the school just reading a book at the back of the office, then the parents sort of get off scot-free. It's no inconvenience to them. So wouldn't you want to see them out of the school, and the parents then have to take some responsibility for what's happened? And these units that come in, de-radicalisation units, should work with the parents to say, look, no more of this. You better smarten up the things that you're teaching your kids at home.
That's exactly how it should be across the board. No exemptions or students, that the responsibility needs to start, including the parents, and the responsibility needs to be put back on the parents. But in terms of these students and a lot of other students, it's quite difficult to even contact the parents. So there's a whole problem in the system, and this is the point that I was trying to make with him, that we've got this huge problem. What I gave him was a snapshot. It's far wider than that. I could sit here and name quite a few schools that are having similar issues. And the response from him to me was, at the end of the meeting, was if teachers have issues, they can come to me.
To you?
To me.
Like you're a liaison officer for the department.
And then
now.
I can refer them back to
the minister said if teachers out there have got problems, they can come to you.
They can come to me.
Well, you don't know every teacher in the New South Wales school education system, and why should it be your responsibility? We're paying the minister, we're paying you senior bureaucrats, Mark Scott, downwards, to actually get on top of this problem and deal with it. He says they should go see you.
Yep, he said they can come
Wow.
to me, and I
What
pushed.
a worry. What a worry.
It's a worry, and I said, this is why we need an inquiry, because we need to see how widespread this is, and to give parents, ex-teachers, because that's where the information lies actually, is with the ex-teachers, and with teachers that don't know me, an opportunity to come forward and state their cases. Now, I've even been contacted by a maintenance man who worked at Punchbowl at this period of time and worked at other schools. He contacted me on Friday night, and he said he and his crew were not allowed to come in the classrooms because the children were too violent. So without an inquiry, how do we hear from these people?
The maintenance man said that.
The maintenance man.
Wow. So your impression from the minister is they're still sweeping things under the carpet.
It's been swept under the carpet.
And hoping this kind of thing might go away.
Yep.
We're going to pay a heavy price as a society for this down the track, aren't we?
We are, because as you said, back to what consequences, what can we look at? Zero tolerance. I raised that with him. And the minute I said zero tolerance, or actually he said, are you referring to zero tolerance? And I said, that's one aspect. He was like, you mean kick, students out of school? They can't go to that school?
Yeah.
Well, if that's how it has to be, then yes, that's how it has to be.
Kick the kids out, because if they're infecting other kids, spreading the radicalisation, that's even worse. So get them out. I would have thought that's logical, but he looked horrified, did he?
He was horrified because they are disrupting the classroom. And look, it doesn't just stop at the classroom. They end up disrupting the whole school. I'm not just talking about, Islamic students here. Let's put it all on the table. I was at a school last year where we had a lockdown in primary school, okay, where a student actually went home, grabbed a metal pole, came back to school, smashed windows, terrorised the whole school. Okay, and his suspension, well, he got a suspension for 2 days. He got a ride home in the police car, which he thought was fantastic, but he got to go to school camp the following week.
Dreadful.
So 2 days suspension,
No
2 days.
punishment.
Terrorised the school, created
and he's off to
anxiety,
the school
and he's off to school camp. Now, when these kind of incidents happen at school, the effects on the other students are going to be lifelong, because the questions that these students go through when they're in lockdown, a lockdown situation is not pleasant. Okay, now I was with year 1 and year 2s, and I don't like to get into the conversation that we actually had, because we're talking about escape plans and all sorts of things, but this is happening.
It is. And we've got to confront it, and we've got to deal with it realistically. Now, we're going to campaign on your behalf here to get the apology you deserve and the recognition of what happened at Punchbowl Primary in 2014, sweeping under the carpet no more. We're going to ensure that these things are out in the open and there's a realistic assessment of the problem and realistic solutions. Now, I want to congratulate you on your bravery, Mrs. A, for what you've done. You're a hero to a lot of people who think, well, we don't know what's going on in the classroom. It's only through you that we're getting this information and we're better informed as a community. But the other thing you've raised is a very disturbing handbook that was distributed at Belfield Islamic College at Rossmore in Western Sydney, part of Liverpool local government area there, Rossmore. Now, you've raised some concerns about the information in that handbook. Let's have a look at how this was covered by Channel 7 News last Thursday with their excellent reporter Brian Seymour, who's right on top of all these issues.
Some Australian school children are being taught democracy is the worst enemy of mankind and the government must be replaced with Islam. The lessons were revealed by a former teacher who was threatened by Muslim students. Today, she met with the Education Minister calling for a public inquiry.
Mrs. A still fears for her safety after revealing she'd been threatened by Muslim students as young as 10 at Punchbowl Public School.
They can turn quite violent, quite aggressive towards teachers and towards each other. You don't know what is going to spark them.
Today she met with Education Minister Rob Stokes, detailing threats, including one to behead her.
No one's scrutinising the material and the content that's been taught in our classrooms. Who's approving it?
She gave Mr. Stokes an account of the abuse she endured and showed him lessons she read to year 1 and 2 students at Belfield Islamic College. The worst enemies of mankind, secularism which divides religious and political roles, the foundation of Australian and Western society, nationalism, and peace, stability and justice can only be achieved through the establishment of Islam and the rule of divinely appointed imams and nothing else.
Well, it's concerning stuff, isn't it? I mean, to have this taught in any Australian school in an environment where there's too much terrorism around the world, how can young people benefit? That's the exact opposite of what we should be teaching, which is the value of Western civilisation, Western culture, to praise democracy, to praise our secular system of government. So, Mrs. A, how concerned are you about this? It just looks dreadful.
I'm quite concerned. At the time, I sort of raised questions and didn't think too much of it, but over the last 5 years and what I've seen develop, this is why I've brought it out and said, we need to consider this. This is what was being taught. Is it still being taught? I believe it very well is, maybe not just in that school, but in mosques and other places. I'm not sure. I can't speak for what's being taught. If it's being taught in one place, where else is it being taught? We need to examine it.
So at Belfield Islamic College, they were instructing teachers to have a mindset to let the students know that democracy is a problem, secular government's a problem, and Islam, replacing those things would be the solution. How many teachers do you think were going down the path of actually teaching that in the classroom?
Well, from my memory, there was only about maybe 5 Australian teachers. The rest were Arabic teachers and Muslim teachers. So I was given that handbook because I can't speak Arabic. So that's what I was asked to substitute their lessons for, to use this because I can't speak the Arabic and can't read it. So I don't know what was being taught in the other schools.
And when you raised the concerns with the school authorities, what did they say?
Didn't go down too well.
No?
No. Started to attack my integrity. And I was actually prepared to take them to court over that. That resolved, but after 7 months, I just didn't feel right for me.
Well, I think your average Australian would be horrified to think that those things could be promoted and taught in any Australian school. And this is a school that receives some government funding?
Correct. My understanding is up to 75%. I could be wrong with those figures, but that's what my research showed, 75% government funding.
And when you raised it with Minister Rob Stokes, what did he say?
Didn't pay any attention to it, really. Just everything, I put it all out on the table and he just didn't look at anything there. I wanted to discuss a lot of these things openly with him because, you know, I even spoke about our education system being quite left-wing ideology and he agreed with that. And it's like, well, okay, you're the minister, you're a conservative government minister, what are you going to do to bring it back to the centre?
It's amazing, isn't it? I mean, we can think of terrorism as a law and order question. There's been a debate about the terrorist in Melbourne, and so too Man Monis with bail laws and the weakness of the judiciary. But realistically, we're breeding a bigger problem in Australia, aren't we? And it's starting in our schools.
We are.
And unless we knock this on the head with the younger generation, then this problem can only get worse.
Correct. And we need to be teaching Western views and Western values in school.
Exactly.
We don't do that.
Exactly. Wouldn't you think the minister straight away would have his department investigating this college to see if it's still being taught, and if so, well, withdraw the government money and just say it's totally and absolutely unacceptable. As you say, they should be teaching the exact opposite, that we're proud of our Western system of democracy and civilisation. So from what you see, the minister's asleep at the wheel. Asleep
at the wheel, even in public schools. Why are we teaching children to design new flags? Why are we teaching children to hate our flags? Why are we teaching children that being white isn't such a good thing, that we should be ashamed of it? We should be knocking this on the head now.
Well, it's a problem around the world. Last week, Tommy Robertson very powerfully said they've had the same thing in the UK, where it's almost illegal or improper to display the flag of England, the St George's Day flag. So right around the world, I think our societies are making it harder for ourselves by being so negative about ourselves. Instead of being proud and strong in advocating the virtues of Western civilisation, we're way too defensive, always apologising for who we are. If we apologise for who we are, surely the young radicals will think, well, why bother supporting them? In fact, I'll go hard against them. Correct. You'd be very hard pressed in our schools to find classrooms that are displaying the Australian flag. Well, congratulations on your work, and you're writing a book. Yes, I'm going to write a book about it, get it all out there. Oh, I think that's so important because there's a lot of political speak, a lot of it weak, about the threat of terrorism, and there's a lot of sort of theory that's advanced, but I think to have practical people like yourselves who've seen this up front in the classroom and to recount that story is crucial in giving a public understanding and jolting the system out of its apathy. Correct. I've got 9 years worth of diaries. And I've got a couple of teaching boxes that I haven't opened yet. Wow. So when I open them up, there's going to be a lot that can be exposed. Well, keep going hard. We're supporting you 100%. We're going to campaign for you. Thank you. And when that book is launched, I'd be happy to be there and help you in any way to make sure it's a bestseller, because all Australians deserve to know your story. So it's so crucial to the safety and prospects of our society when we see this happening among the younger generation. So Mrs A, keep up the great work. Keep up the great work. Thank you for watching Mark Latham's Outsiders. After this very short break, we'll be back with our panel, Tom Switzer and James Morrow, to talk about all the big international events. Well, plenty happening around the world, international events left, right and centre, and I'm joined by a wonderful panel. James Morrow from the Daily Telegraph, thank you very much for coming on Mark Latham's Outsiders.
Great to be here, Mark.
And Tom Switzer, our old mate from Fairfax and the ABC, the great survivor. Who says there's no diversity? This can't be an echo chamber when we've got a representative of no less an organisation than Fairfax and the ABC.
Can I say I feel at home here?
Thank you. I'm glad to hear that. I'm glad to hear that. Now, Tom, last time you were here, we were talking about the calling of the UK election. This remarkable result, I suppose it just demonstrates that there's nothing predictable about world politics these days. How did Jeremy Corbyn go from 28% in the polls at the beginning of the campaign and finish on 40% and a whisker away from government?
Look, he ran a very good campaign. He was, we are told, all too often genuine. He sounded authentic. Mind you, people like Hitler and Stalin sounded genuine and authentic, so I don't think that in itself is a good criteria for being a good leader. But nevertheless, to be fair to him, he resonated with a lot of young people. And the thing that I found really intriguing, Mark, was that on foreign policy, when he would all too often blame British meddling in the Middle East for inviting blowback, this did not hurt him one bit. And I think the cold hard reality is that critique of British foreign policy resonated with a lot of young people who have seen wars like Iraq and Libya turn into disasters and make the terror problem worse. So I'll cut him some slack on that issue. But the cold hard reality is that he also resonated on school tuition fees, you know, making it clear that under his government, students would not be able to would not be paying high prices or paying prices at all, or fees for their education.
He's fiercely anti-establishment. Do you think this is now the default position for a successful campaign? We saw Bernie Sanders running Hillary Clinton close for the Democrat nomination.
Yes.
Donald Trump as an outsider, anti-establishment, and now Corbyn's success. It seems to be a trend, doesn't it?
Well, it's interesting too, because if you look at the two establishment centre-left, centre-right candidates in Britain and America, they were Hillary Clinton and Theresa May, and they were challenged by populists and outsiders who were old white men.
But I think there's also more to that too. I mean, I think there's a couple of things to pull out of this, Mark. Number one, it's really interesting how the young people's vote has changed. I think that really it has to do with the free stuff thing more than it does the foreign policy. Yes, they don't teach about how horrible communism is in the schools. No, most of them have no sort of historical memory of even 9/11 now at this point, which, you know, if you want to start talking about blowback from Islamic world and Christian world, Western relations, we can go back to the Battle of Poitiers and tours in Vienna if you want to. I think it really comes down to the cold hard cash, which is what really drove Trump. Trump's voters were not concerned by ideology. They did not care about being, you know, purists on free trade or purists on conservative issues. They really cared actually more about who's actually looking out for my interests, who is actually going to stop the bleeding. And I think that that's the interesting thing there. And I think one other point too is to make is that Corbyn is actually a bit almost like the Marine Le Pen of this election, insofar as, you know, Marine Le Pen was not supposed to win, but did not win, but made very large gains in the share of the vote for her party. Or, well, she actually, you know, she got rid of that party. And that's the same thing Corbyn has done now. And I think May is in this very difficult position where she has to negotiate this deal with the unionists from Northern Ireland and get something bedded down very quickly to put this Corbyn situation to rest, because otherwise he's going to keep on nipping at her heels and it's going to make governing harder and harder for her.
I'm interested in Tom's point about Corbyn's rhetoric on foreign policy, because the orthodoxy would have been after the attacks in Manchester and then London Bridge and Morrow Market, that this would have played into the hands of the Tory party, a strong stance on law and order. But two things seem to happen. There was a holding to account of Theresa May and a reduction in policing numbers and her record as Home Secretary, which was said to be inadequate. And also a recognition perhaps that, and we saw this in the United States, that the invasion of Iraq in 2003 has in large part brought Islamic State and those problems home to our Western nations, because whatever you think about Saddam Hussein, he had a way of dealing with these troublemakers, put them up against the wall and shoot them. And young people in particular seem to be understanding that if you have intervention, you have pro-war parties intervening in the Middle East. None of it ends very well, Tom.
But May was very weak on the policing issue. I mean, she should have defended her record as Home Secretary by saying that the reason why the police numbers have come down is because crime has come down in Britain. She never made that point. But on the point about foreign policy, I think that Corbyn, all things considered, is right. Although I think we should not downplay the ideological motivation of many of these jihadists.
Yeah.
I mean, let's remember at various stages over the last 20 or 30 years, there have been times where the United States and the West have not intervened in countries where they could have helped intervened in foreign policy crises like Bosnia, for example. The Americans sat on their hands for several years, and at the time, a lot of Muslim extremists were blaming the Americans for not getting involved in Bosnia. So I think it's more complicated than just simple blowback, although that's part of it. I think the other reality is that a lot of these jihadists are motivated by a hatred of the West, and Corbyn downplays that aspect, and I suspect that doesn't really resonate with Middle England.
And I think that just to add on to that, there's a third issue here which we're actually not talking about yet, is immigration. And you know, the youth vote has been fed this whole multicultural line, but this whole multicultural line has led to these very large Islamic enclaves in the north of Britain particularly, where you've seen, you know, not just things like the Manchester terrorist attack, but also the Rotherham sex scandal, where hundreds and even thousands of British girls were sexually assaulted by organized gangs of men, mostly from Pakistan, and yet there's been a cultural thing where you cannot speak out against it, lest you be branded Islamophobic or racist, and so this multicultural thing and anything short of basically open door immigration and allowing these sort of enclaves to develop winds up creating, well, what, you know, Melanie Phillips called in her 2006 book, Londonistan. And I was actually looking over that book again last night, and much of what she talked about then hasn't changed. It's created exactly what she said would come to pass.
But on the younger people, though, in Britain, I think James is right. They were born after the winter of discontent in the 1970s, where the period of Keynesianism and economic stagflation led to you know, industrial disputes all over Britain, shut down the country for several years in the late 70s. That presaged the rise of Margaret Thatcher.
And then Thatcher having to fight with the coal miners' union, who wanted to keep the country shut down.
Yeah.
What about the comparison some are making with Malcolm Turnbull's campaign in Australia? That, as with Theresa May, low energy, chanting slogans, not really standing for conservative values, no positive, hard-edged program of reform.
And hubris too, Mark.
And leaving a vacuum that the other side fill. And hubris, you think there are
I think there's a good point there about Thatcher, about May and Turnbull. They both called elections, relatively snap elections. Certainly in the case of May, it was a snap election. She didn't need to go to the polls for 3 years. Yeah. And she did so at a time when her party held a 22-point lead over Corbyn, which is why the so-called experts like us thought that she would win convincingly. But this is the magic of politics. Circumstances can change very quickly in this business, and give credit to Shorten in Australia and Corbyn in Britain for running very good campaigns. They worked a lot harder than Turnbull and May did, and that's why they nearly won.
James, do you see a comparison?
I think there's definitely a comparison in the way, I mean, the timings were slightly different, but definitely in the way May campaign, now I wasn't watching it, but it certainly seemed to me like the same sort of campaign Turnbull ran, which was very much well, let's just go out, we'll go to a couple events, and then we're done by 2 o'clock.
They were scared of real engagement with the people,
and
it all looked fake.
Theresa May refused to go into a debate with Jeremy Corbyn, which made her look like she had something to hide.
And arrogance as well.
Arrogant, and she was never a person that anybody could really warm to. She seemed like, whereas Jeremy Corbyn, for all of this sort of weird, socialist beard, Trotskyite, Dumbledore look that he's got, it's he at least people had a sense of who he was, and that there was some blood and some passion.
Consistency
there.
and authenticity.
Do you think also that Turnbull and May are alike in the sense that they failed to really spell out a core governing philosophy that was consistent with their conservative free market
don't
values?
Really stand for much. I think there's a crisis in traditional conservatism, because a lot of the institutions are collapsing in terms of public trust, that outside of politics, anti-establishment politics is more successful, more popular. How do conservatives respond to that? If you just walk around the campaign with artificial events, not engaging, chanting slogans, well, the public work out that it's all fake. And at least they'll go and give some recognition to some authentic but flawed candidates like Jeremy Corbyn, and we've seen something similar with Bernie Sanders in the United States. So This is sort of a free kick to the left on the basis they might believe in something.
Exactly, yeah.
And that's the danger, I think, for Conservative candidates, is to say, well, let's just try and be more left, you know, which then creates sort of a death spiral, I think,
They've got to find a new way of engaging with their
Exactly.
base. And
well, part of the problem
the
is that Turnbull certainly, and I suspect May, is neither of them is a real true believer in free markets and conservative values.
Exactly. Now, you're watching Mark Latham's Outsiders. We're going to turn now to the United States. We've mentioned Donald Trump. Let's have a look at the sensational, I think the very poor testimony of James Comey, former FBI boss, at the Senate committee last week.
And finally, did you show copies of your memos to anyone outside of the Department of Justice?
Yes.
And to whom did you show copies?
I asked, President tweeted on Friday after I got fired that I better hope there's not tapes. I woke up in the middle of the night on Monday night, because it didn't dawn on me originally, that there might be corroboration for our conversation, there might be a tape. And my judgment was I needed to get that out into the public square. And so I asked a friend of mine to share the content of the memo with a reporter. Didn't do it myself for a variety of reasons, but I asked him to because I thought that might prompt the appointment of a special counsel. And so I asked a close friend of mine to do it.
What a way to do business. He woke up in the middle of the night and thought he needed to leak against the President of the United States confidential FBI documents. I mean, at that point I thought Comey lost all credibility. Tom, this bloke's a worse leaker than Kevin Rudd, isn't he?
Oh, that's saying something. Look, I think the problem with Comey here, Mark, is that if indeed Trump ordered him to stop the investigation into Flynn and the Russia probe generally, Comey should have resigned there and then.
Exactly.
Or at least inform the senior members of the Justice Department or the White House counsel, or even the senior ranking Democrat and Republican figures on the Senate and Judiciary.
Well, he did none of that. He did none of that. In his testimony, he said he didn't have the presence of mind to think anything other than I should be careful what I now say to Trump. So having done none of those things, he's lost credibility.
I think so, although it is intriguing that the Washington Post, the Washington Post, the New York Times, CNN, the major mainstream media networks think that Trump comes out of this really badly and that Comey...
Well, they always say that.
But they always say this, and I think the fundamental point is from that testimony, it was a political anticlimax. He shed absolutely no light on this allegation that the Russians were in collusion with the Trump campaign, nor did he really prove that there was obstruction of justice.
Well, didn't he say that he confirmed what we've long thought, that Trump himself is not under investigation for collusion with the Russians?
That was the big story here. I mean, you know, this Senate testimony, I haven't seen Senate testimony fizzle since Frank Panhandley and Godfather 2. It was you know, such a turned out to be nothing. And yet, Comey also revealed himself to be such a weaselly political operator, and you know, talking about all of the stuff with Loretta Lynch and Hillary Clinton, and yet how he never aired any of those same concerns about collusion or obstruction of justice, which, you know, on a prima facie basis, there's much more evidence was committed by Hillary Clinton when she was Secretary of State and afterwards around her emails and around all of the other investigations that were happening during her campaign.
I've always found Comey to be unconvincing in his public presentations and his handling of the Clinton emails, where he said in the middle of last year, he said, oh, well, she's off the hook, but we've got a few little criticisms.
Yeah.
And then the tangle he got into in the middle of the campaign, which Clinton blames for her loss. I mean, Comey is never presented as a strong, decisive law enforcement officer.
Do you think Trump would have won more credibility, though, if he had sacked Comey in the first few days in the Oval Office?
Not reappointed him.
I think so. That's what I've always
said.
Maybe
that's what he should have done.
I think that keeping Comey around was almost the original sin of this administration.
Right. But the bottom line here is that there is no evidence at all to indicate any collusion. You'll often hear this charge being made, but no one's been able to find the smoking gun.
And now the media has moved. They've moved now from collusion to obstruction, and so they're constantly trying to find something, because there's this very concerted effort by you know, the entire political class in Washington to take down the Trump presidency, not just delegitimize it, but to actually end it and to use, you know, any means necessary to get him out of the White House.
My view on all this, and Mark, as you know, I've been a critic of Trump throughout the campaign and even throughout his presidency, but one can be a critic of Trump and still recognise that Trump's victory has so unhinged his critics and opponents in the Democratic Party and in the media and the broader cultural left. It's unhinged them to such an extent that they're trying to rationalise how on earth did this guy get elected, and they're looking for something that just isn't there. There's no evidence.
What I
of collusion.
find remarkable is that his opponents have given no attention to their own inadequacies.
Correct.
There's been no analysis that Clinton lost the campaign because she ignored white men, she ignored Rust Bucket State, she ignored the victims of economic restructuring. There's been no acknowledgement of the weakness of identity politics and coalition building around identity. And in fact, it's almost like there's a permanent state of hysterical derangement among Trump's opponents. And they can't accept their own weaknesses in the electorate, so they take it out with this ongoing fantasy about Russia, Russia, Russia.
And the Democrats ought to be careful here, because their campaign against Trump here clearly resonates with their base, particularly in states like California, Massachusetts and New York. But if they persist in this argument when there's no evidence to support any collusion, they're going to continue to alienate themselves from those.
But this is role reversal, isn't it, James? Role reversal of the orthodoxy in the campaign, that the Democrats had a natural electoral majority that Trump couldn't crack.
Yes.
Now it looks like the Democrats are just playing narrowly to their base and are looking like a minority grouping.
And what they're trying now to do is pick up the pieces, but they haven't even gotten to the stage one, admit you've got a problem point. They're now looking at the 2018 midterm elections, where they need to get control back in the legislature. They're not going to get in the Senate. They might get in the House. It always swings against the party in the White House, but they're having trouble now because they're still so stuck on Hillary, and Hillary's lost. They can't get over that and just say, we need to rebuild ourselves from the ground up, rather than make it a referendum entirely on the Trump administration.
And we should remember, when it comes to impeachment, which no one in their right mind is even seriously contemplating, but if it does come to impeachment,
but the Democrats
Senate needs well, not all Democrats, only a few noisy minority ones, but if it does come to impeachment, remember the Senate needs 2/3 majority to support impeachment. The Republicans have a majority, 52, 48 or thereabouts. Numbers aren't there.
But James, are we just going to get 4 years of this? Is this a permanent state of derangement?
Well, I think so. I think we're actually now in this very dangerous period for American politics, where if the Democrats don't start offering policies that are positive to their base and saying, here's our plan for improving the country, rather than here's our plan for wrecking the administration, they're going to wind up in the wilderness. But you're really going to have this two tribes America now, where Republicans and Democrats are just simply going to be going at it hammer and tongs now ad infinitum.
I think one of the big losers here, though, are the mainstream media. I mean, if you read the New York Times and the Washington Post, and I'm one of those who reads them twice, 3 times a day.
Me too.
It's got to a point now where I do find that these mainstream organisations are just propaganda outfits to get Trump. And they are betraying all sense of objectivity, fairness and balance.
Well, it's sad for the Republic, isn't it? I mean, American
so.
politics at this level.
And consumers of news who want fair and balanced coverage.
Yeah, and they say, well, why do people turn away from the media? Well, it's because they're trying so hard to push a narrative, and every day it changes, so they don't get obstruction. Now they're going to do whatever the next thing is. It's there are tapes, there are no tapes, and they all think they've got Watergate Mark II. It's really kind of sad.
Yeah. Well, here at Mark Latham's Outsiders, you get plenty of objectivity. There's no derangement syndrome here of any kind. In fact, one of our great assets is our cartoon in residence, Zeg, the great Zeg. Let's have a look at his work this week. He's lobbed in 2 cartoons. The first of them there is this controversy about Coles having the Happy Ramadan signs. Now, not everyone will agree with Zeg here, but he's outlining the fact that ISIS fighters will be in Coles. He says that Coles doesn't provide similar treatment to Easter and Christmas, with all the bells and whistles and trimmings of signs. There's no Happy Easter and Happy Christmas signs at Coles. They've taken a bit of flack. So that's Zeg's take on that little controversy. Send us in your opinions if you don't agree with Zeg. Send them in if you do. And his second cartoon is the wonderful Andrew Bolt fight back against the Antifa thugs who tried to attack him. Here's Zeg looking at Bolt's working day, where he's off to lunch, Andrew Bolt. He's going to have an interview on 3AW, back to Sky News, doing a bit more. Just a normal day for him, with a paramilitary guard that needed to protect Andrew Bolt from the left-wing thugs who tried to take him on. Now, I want to pay tribute to Andrew Bolt. Let's have a look at the footage of how he handled those lunatics in the Battle of Carlton, as it's become known. He was going into the book signing, they set upon him, and here was the magnificent fight back from Andrew Rocky Bolt. How good was that? I reckon that's just magnificent. Now, I want you to know I had a conversation with Andrew Bolt earlier in the week where I said, Andrew, you've set a very high bar for what people outside of the left might have to achieve if they're ever set upon. What does it mean if someone attacks me going into a function? I'm going to have to knock them right out, drop them like a bad habit, put them in hospital to measure up to the lofty standards of Andrew Bolt. James and Tom, did you think Andrew had it in him?
I did. Look, he's 57 years old. I don't know what his workout regime is. I have never worked out in my life, but I would love to train under this guy because that was just, I mean, those hooks, bam, and he
he threw the punch from the shoulder and had a bit of a kick there to the guy's nuts. It was magnificent, wasn't it, Tom?
It was fantastic, but there is a great deal of hypocrisy here, as there always is when we're talking about the left. I mean, when Alan Joyce, the CEO of Qantas, was pied in the face.
Yeah, we showed that earlier.
You showed that earlier.
Just the cream pie.
Now, he was overwhelmingly defended by all the usual suspects. Fair enough. This was uncivilised behaviour. You don't go around behaving like that. But what's good for the goose is good for the gander. Where are all the bleeding hearts coming out to the defence of Andrew Bolt? If anything, they're actually egging on the protesters for pieing him.
There's a change.org petition to charge for the police to charge Andrew Bolt for what was an act of self-defence. I haven't seen anything as magnificent as that since I sorted out the taxi driver Mustafa in 2001. I wish I had, if only I had a video. If only I had a video of that, I too would be a national hero like Andrew Bolt.
He's nearly as good as Steve Bowden, what he did to Mark Broadhurst in that 1981 semi-final between Newtown and Manly.
Tom's getting into rugby league now, of course. So fantastic. Congratulations, Andrew Bolt. I think your legend is made right around the country and indeed right around the world for such a wonderful fight back. You're watching Mark Latham's Outsiders. Thanks to Tom and James for your contribution.
Always a pleasure.
All matters international and boxing with Andrew Bolt. Thanks for your commentary, and we'll be back after this short break. Well, that's our show for tonight at Mark Latham's Outsiders in partnership with Rebel Media. Thanks very much for watching. Don't forget to go to the website, marklathamsoutsiders.com. You put your name and your email address in and you'll get all the information from Rebel about what we're doing here in Australia, what they're doing in so many parts of the world in pushing back against political correctness, fostering freedom of speech and a new style of politics. Alternative media, the way of the future. Alternative media. So thanks very much for tuning in this evening. Next week, on the show, a very special interview. When I was in Toronto, I was able to catch up with Jordan Peterson, this Toronto University professor who's become the leading academic pushing back and deconstructing political correctness, identity politics. Fantastic interview that we're going to have next week on Mark Latham's Outsiders. Thanks again for watching, and we'll catch you in 7 days' time.